Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. One way or the other, we're going to have Greenland, said President Donald Trump as he doubled down on his threat to acquire the Arctic island, while Greenland's government says their home is simply not for sale. This, as NATO Secretary General downplays fears of a crisis within the alliance. More on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. Ukraine continues to struggle with massive energy shortages. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz seeks to improve Berlin's ties with New Delhi. And Hungary grants asylum to former Polish minister facing multiple criminal charges. As the discussions on the possible future of Greenland continue, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has said that U.S. threats against the island have not brought the alliance to a crisis point, a statement which comes amid speculation that some European NATO countries could be considering boosting their military presence on the Arctic island. Joining me now from Brussels to shed light on the latest is our correspondent Alex Cadier. Good evening, Alex. So Mark Rutte is telling the NATO alliance to keep calm and carry on, while Donald Trump claims the U.S. would take Greenland one way or the other. Help us understand.
Well, good evening, Claudia. Clearly a message of reassurance from the Secretary-General of NATO, Mark Rutte. He was in Croatia and was repeatedly asked as to whether or not the threats by the United States to annex or acquire Greenland represent a crisis for the alliance. His answer simply no. Well, let's bring it back to what the government of Greenland, the coalition government of Greenland, has said just in the last few hours. They have said that under no circumstance would they accept a takeover from the United States. They were pointing to international law, to the links between Greenland and Denmark, to the elected government of Greenland itself. Meanwhile, Donald Trump had this to say.
If we don't take Greenland, Russia or China will. And I'm not letting that happen. If we don't take Greenland, Russia or China will take Greenland. And I am not going to let that happen. I'd love to make a deal with them. It's easier. But one way or the other, we're going to have Greenland.
Are you okay?
Well, if that were to happen, the Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said it would represent the end of the NATO alliance. Another voice joining that today is Andreas Kubilius, the European Commission's Defence Commissioner, saying he agrees with the Danish Prime Minister that it would represent the end of the NATO alliance. We have heard these warnings from European powers over the last few days and weeks, and a lot of pressure on Mark Rutte, who had been rather close or rather complimentary of Donald Trump in other instances. He was asked repeatedly at this press conference in Croatia if this is a crisis, if we should be concerned by these threats from the United States. His exact words were no, not at all. In fact, we are going in the right direction. He also referenced things that are happening within the NATO alliance when it comes to the Arctic. There are discussions behind the scenes led by the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Alexis Grinkovich, about bolstering the NATO alliance's posture in the Arctic, not just in Greenland. Now, that may be in response to concerns from Washington, D.C. We've also seen reporting that Germany and the UK, perhaps other countries, are considering a bigger military presence on the island as well. But within NATO, clearly, more concerns, more expressions of concern about Arctic security, about Russian presence in the Arctic, Chinese presence in the Arctic as well. So on one hand, you have threats from the United States. You have reporting that European powers may want to send more forces to bolster Greenlandic security. But at the same time, warnings from the Danish Prime Minister, warnings from European leaders that this could pose a real threat to the stability and structure of the NATO alliance. We know that Danish officials, the Danish Foreign Minister and the Greenlandic Foreign Minister, will travel to Washington in the next couple of days to meet with Secretary of State Marco Rubio to clarify exactly what the U.S. administration is expecting from Greenland. That, of course, you can expect a rather tense meeting. As things stand, although the NATO alliance is pledging to do more in the Arctic, it appears that for now, on this trajectory, the United States remains firmly on a collision course with some of its oldest and staunchest allies. Claudia.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was Alex Cadier reporting live from Brussels. Two kites representing two countries. This is one of the leading images behind the visit of German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who has made his way to India. The trip, the first of its kind for the German official, could mean the dawn of a new economic relationship with the world's most populous country and the fastest growing economy in the G20 group. Is this a sign of a new relationship taking off? Paweł Trzaskowski has the details.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz flies traditional kites with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. As this is Merz's first visit to the region, it is a telling symbol of new relations taking off.
All his predecessors actually visit first China, then Japan, and India was always third or even fourth.
Berlin aims to strengthen economic ties with the most populous country in the world.
The close cooperation between economies like India and Germany is very important for humanity.
India's annual projected GDP growth is reaching 6%, making it one of the fastest growing economies among the G20 countries. But apart from Germany's particular interests, Merz's visit also heralds Europe's wider foray into India. A free trade agreement between the European Union and India could be signed soon.
The President of the European Commission and the President of the European Council will travel to India at the end of the month to sign this agreement if it has been finalized by then.
The European Union is now on the verge of signing a loudly contested Mercosur trade deal with South America. Securing a trade partner in Asia as big as India is also seen as crucial for the bloc. As two already existing free trade areas, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, neither of which include India or the EU, could soon monopolize trade in the region.
Both India and the European Union, they have to move quickly because it's a matter of time. In the next 2 decades, there would be no place for negotiations.
India also seems happy to oblige, as multi-directional business strategies are at the core of the country's politics. Hence the recent visit by Vladimir Putin to India, as Russia is India's main oil supplier.
The message is very simple. We will speak to all sides because we want to safeguard our interests.
But the European Union and Russia are not the only ones lining up to strike a deal with India. Washington also hopes to sign a bilateral trade agreement, despite slapping tariffs of up to 50% on India last year.
Real friends can disagree, but always resolve their differences in the end.
And Poland doesn't want to be late to the table either. Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski will travel to India next week. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Meetings with German President Walter Steinmeier and German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius are on top of the agenda of the upcoming visit of the Polish Speaker of Parliament to Berlin. The reason? Warsaw wants to strengthen Polish-German cooperation. Gabriela Jelonek reports.
Polish Parliament Speaker Włodzimierz Czarzasty is taking his first official foreign visit to Germany.
The agenda includes talks with President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, Bundestag Speaker Julia Klöckner and Defence Minister Boris Pistorius.
The last time the Speaker of the Polish Parliament visited the Bundestag was 6 years ago. The Warsaw government wants to strengthen the Polish-German parliamentary diplomacy. The visit comes on the backdrop of deepening military cooperation between Warsaw and Berlin, which is gaining a new, practical dimension, after signing a joint declaration between Polish and German governments.
We will cooperate to ensure that the level of our presence in the NATO command structure is adequate to our contribution to NATO deterrence and defence activities. We will work closely to strengthen Polish National Defence Initiative East Shield.
Beginning around April, German soldiers from the Bundeswehr's engineering forces will focus on the Polish borders with Russia and Belarus. Their main tasks will include constructing trenches, anti-tank barriers and laying barbed wire. According to current plans, the German mission in Poland will last until the end of 2027. But the military cooperation does not end there, as Germany will continue to help safeguard Poland's airspace. Since December, German Eurofighter jets have been deployed in the Polish airbase in Malbork as part of the NATO air policing framework and the enhanced Eastern Sentry operation.
The Eurofighters serve as a deterrent, but also as a means of actively defending against threats. However, in the future, we will undoubtedly operate with a mix of different weapon systems and drone defence. This also includes ground-based systems, which are currently being developed and produced in European countries.
What is more, Czarzasty's choice to travel to Berlin by train is not accidental. The latest round of dialogue between Poland and Germany will explore, among other things, the deployment of cross-border rail links as a strategic priority, as well as ways to increase the capacity of current transport corridors, including those for military troops. Examples include the Warsaw-Berlin, Gdańsk-Szczecin-Berlin, and Przemyśl-Dresden-Lipzig corridors. All of this infrastructure will be also synchronized within the Military Mobility Model Corridor Initiative, sometimes referred as Military Schengen. This is the EU's way of enabling military convoys to cross member states in a matter of days. After his trip to Berlin, Czarzasty plans to visit France to renew cooperation within the Weimar Triangle format, the alliance between Poland, Germany and France, established in 1991 as post-Cold War signal of friendship between the three states. For TVP World, Gabriela Jelonek.
Not one, but two former Polish ministers have now found asylum in Hungary while under criminal investigation in Poland. This time, it's Zbigniew Ziobro, the former justice minister in the Law and Justice administration that governed Poland until 2023, stands accused of misappropriating millions of euros and leading a criminal organization. He joins his former deputy, Marcin Romanowski, in Budapest in an event that further deepens the rift in relations between Hungary and Poland. Our correspondent, Andrew Sweeney, has more.
What do Polish former Deputy Minister Marcin Romanowski, ex-Prime Minister of North Macedonia Nikola Gruevski and former Minister of Justice of Poland Zbigniew Ziobro have in common? All three have been granted political asylum by Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban after fleeing charges ranging from fraud, abuse of power and misuse of funds.
The former Minister of Justice, Mr. Ziobro, who was the mastermind of the political corruption system, has asked the government of Viktor Orban for political asylum. A logical choice.
Ziobro is accused of misappropriating over 35 million euros in public funds. He faces 26 charges, including establishing and leading a criminal organisation. A member of the Law and Justice Party, Ziobro led the Justice Ministry between 2015 and 2023. He denies the charges against him.
I have decided to remain abroad until genuine guarantees of the rule of law are restored in Poland. I believe that instead of acquiescing to being silenced and subjected to a torrent of lies, which I would have no opportunity to refute, I can do more by fighting the mounting lawlessness in Poland.
Hungary's government believes him, and Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó claims that other Polish citizens have been granted asylum along with Ziobro.
Democracy and the rule of law are in crisis in Poland, noting that many people are subject to political persecution. Hungary has received asylum requests from Poland and has approved several of them, granting asylum or refugee status while withholding names to protect those concerned.
Ziobro joins his former deputy, Romanowski, in Budapest. He fled to Hungary's capital in 2024 while facing multiple charges of fraud and abuse of power. A court in Warsaw is expected to rule on issuing an arrest warrant for Ziobro on January 15th. If a warrant is issued in Poland, a European arrest warrant may be issued as well. According to law.pl, Hungary will be legally bound to consider the arrest warrant despite Ziobro's status as an asylum seeker. For TVP World, Andrew Sweeney.
After years of moving to Western Europe for work, more Poles are now returning home. Speaking on TVP World's On the Record, Polish Finance and Economy Minister Andrzej Domański says the country's improving economy is driving this trend.
Well, so we see that from UK, for example, and Germany, people are coming back. And this is exactly because, I believe, it's because wages in Poland are growing. Zloty is getting stronger, so when you compare wages in Poland to wages in UK or Germany or Norway, where I was a couple of days ago, it's really they're getting stronger and stronger, and I hope that this is just the beginning of this trend. I don't remember the exact figure, but tens of thousands of Polish people living in UK decided last year to come back to Poland. They're really welcome here.
To find out more, join Adam Yasser for On the Record right after World News Tonight at 8:30 p.m. CET. Let's continue. 3 weeks of continuous protests, government crackdown, countless victims, and the biggest public uprising the country has seen in decades. That's the reality in Iran now, where people have decided to voice their opposition to the worsening living conditions and the poor economic situation. What first seemed like another hurdle for the Islamic Republic could spell a new dawn for the country. As the temperature is going up in the pressure cooker, Iranians ask, when will the U.S. act just as Donald Trump promised? Benjamin Lee reports.
Nearly 3 weeks into the uprising, Iran is facing one of the most serious crises in the Islamic Republic's history. Despite a sweeping internet blackout, images and satellite data show protests continuing in cities nationwide. Human rights groups say the death toll has risen to over 500, but may be significantly higher, as families struggle to identify victims and recover bodies under tight security. Washington had previously warned that it would step in if the unrest was violently suppressed. Latest developments see diplomatic efforts already underway.
Iran called to negotiate yesterday. The leaders of Iran called, they want to negotiate.
And the internet blackout may also be alleviated.
We may get the internet going, if that's possible. We may speak to Elon, because as you know, he's very good at that kind of thing.
Iranians remain cautiously in favor of intervention on pragmatic grounds.
The majority of the society is calling for the U.S. intervention because they know that they have no means to resist against the regime and against the system.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian blamed the unrest on foreign interference, accusing the United States and Israel of orchestrating the riots.
They have trained a group inside the country and abroad and have brought terrorists into the country to burn down mosques, businesses and bazaars.
But despite the protests, Tehran insists that the unrest is being contained.
We are in the next phase in which the situation has come under control.
Meanwhile, Reza Pahlavi, the exiled son of Iran's last Shah, is attempting to position himself as an alternative to the Islamic Republic.
President Trump, as the leader of the free world, has closely observed your indescribable bravery and has declared that he is ready to help you. Do not abandon the streets.
International pressure is also mounting, with the EU shunning its doors to the Iranian regime.
Today, I have taken the decision to ban all diplomatic staff and any other representatives of the Islamic Republic of Iran from all European Parliament premises.
We stand ready to propose new, more severe sanctions following the violent crackdown on protesters.
From London to Paris, members of the Iranian diaspora are staging protests of their own, calling for the end of the Islamic Republic.
We are facing a barbaric and savage regime that wants to massacre its population behind closed doors.
As pressure builds at home and abroad, events in Tehran are now being closely watched in both the West and Moscow for what they could mean for the balance of power in the Middle East and as a test of global influence in the region. For TVP World, Benjamin Lee.
To understand where the Ukraine peace talks are now and how the pressure on Greenland might shake up the power dynamic in the region, joining me now for an exclusive interview on World News Tonight is Gabrielius Landsbergis, former Lithuanian foreign minister. Minister, thank you for your time and thanks for joining me on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start with the words by President Donald Trump. He said on Sunday that the United States would take Greenland, quote, one way or the other, warning that Russia or China would take over if Washington didn't act. What's your opinion on this statement, Minister?
Well, I think that we Europeans need to take the statements by Donald Trump seriously. So far, what he has said regarding Europe, most of the things have transpired. So therefore, I think that the pressure will continue to be built up against Europe, against Denmark. I think that the hope for President Trump is that the pressure will be unbearable, and and Europeans will seek for a way how to hand Greenland over to the United States. But I mean, the words of Danish Prime Minister have to also to be taken seriously. That might spell the end of transatlantic alliance.
I'm happy that you mentioned this, because in opposition to that very statement by Donald Trump, we also heard from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Croatia, who said, no, not at all. I think we really are working in the right direction. This stands in a very, very big contrast to what's been said by Donald Trump. What do you think Rutte means by the right direction?
Well, I think that he reacted to strong words by Danish Prime Minister, by other European leaders who really are upset and anxious about the mounting pressure. His position has been rather clear since he took up the post. He tried to mitigate by diplomatic means any frictions that were arising between the Europeans and Americans. We all remember the daddy quote that he used in order to call, the way that he called President Trump. I think that he's continuing that as well, kind of trying to lower down the pressure. But I mean, he puts a lot on the line. If he's unable to convince Europeans, if he's unable to stop the crisis that is, potentially brewing around Greenland, then his, I would believe that his career might be on the line.
So on one hand, we have the US, which is undermining the EU's, so to speak, multilateral rule book, which appears somewhat increasingly outdated in a far more transactional state of things. What do you think will be the EU's new tactic to maintain the relationship with the US while guarding its own interests?
Well, Europe has to come to terms that it either needs to show up force and strength, or it will be forced to accept whatever is being asked by the allies, by the friends or enemies alike. And I think that we've set up the tone rather in a bad way. Just the last meeting of the European leaders last year in December, when Europe was supposed to use the Russian frozen assets. In one way, it did not turn out as a fiasco for Ukraine. But I think it was taken as a sign of weakness by Americans, by Russians, and by whoever is watching, because Europe was unable to figure out a decision that would allow us to not to use our own money, but to use our adversaries' money in order to support our ally. And I think that these examples portray Europe in a very weak position. And if our allies and Americans in this regard believe that Europe is weak, the pressure will only grow. So for us to change the dynamics, we need to show strength. And one of the options could be, yes, please go ahead.
Pardon. Showing of strength. I wanted to speak more on that, because the Telegraph reported on Sunday that there are some military chiefs from Britain and other European countries that are possibly considering a deployment of a NATO mission to Greenland. Do you think that such deployment is going to take place anytime soon, and is going to be enough of a showing of power to be able to deter any such ideas from the US?
Well, I believe that the mindset behind this decision is a bit different. It's not to fight the Americans, but it's to show Donald Trump that Europeans are doing their part in order to mitigate the threats that Donald Trump is mentioning. The threats from Russia and China, supposedly taking over Greenland, even though we're not seeing real signs of that happening anytime soon. So kind of to send British troops, French troops to say that, look, we're defending the island. I don't have a sense that would work. It might be a good example of things being done, if we're looking for some measure. But the other measure could be to offer Greenland a path back to European Union. Greenland left in 70s European Union in order to not to be part of a single market, not to adhere to the fishing rules. That could be a step that would tell, well, unfortunately, fortunately, Europe has a way how to assisting its friends and allies in the closest vicinity.
And I wanted to ask my final question because we've heard about the European Union Defense Commissioner Andrius Kubilius, who potentially spoke about the idea of a call of establishing a standing military force of 100,000 troops and overhauling of the political process. Do you think that we've reached a point of urgency when it comes to the situation on the continent where member states will agree to such a solution?
Well, my belief is that we've definitely reached a point where we need this, but I'm not sure whether we reached a point where we would agree on this. We've seen European Union countries having a very different points of view when it comes to European defense. Even take the latest NATO summit in Hague, where countries like Spain and even Belgium decided that they are not going to reach, adhere to the calls of going up with their defense spending. And then you take countries like Poland or Lithuania, which are way above the 2%, 3%. My country's even at 5% this year, of defense spending. So when you would see the eastern flank countries agreeing to to military, coordinate a better military coordination, maybe even the European army in the eastern flank, I don't think that the countries in the south and the countries in the west would agree to that.
Minister, thank you for your time. Thank you for your insight. It was a pleasure to have you on the program. Gabrielius Landsbergis, former Lithuanian foreign minister, was my guest. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
And so this would be all for now. Thank you so much for joining us on World News Tonight. And remember to tune in to On the Record with Adam Yasser coming up next, right after this show.